On vacation, kids are running around. So before I go outside to find where they are and chase them down, they're probably looking for turtles or frogs in a pond. Dr. Birx is in the news. Dr. Birx is in the news, and Jack Posobiec says she needs to be investigated? Really?
But you were digging into, and this is so important, Dr. Birx's new biography, which to me reads like a confession.
And she said that the U.S. did not have sufficient data to back up the plans that she wanted for lockdowns and for economic shutdowns. She said actually that the goal was to introduce greater and greater shutdown measures, but to do it slowly, one piece at a time. She brought each new plan for the shutdown, such as the 15 days to stop the spread and all of this, one little piece at a time, not revealing that her true intentions were to go much further. She was literally advocating for boiling the frog slowly, and we Americans and her rights were definitely the frog. So at each step of the game, when Americans would give up their rights and would say, okay, we'll do this little piece, 15 days to stop the spread. We all remember that. It sounded so reasonable. And it turned out that even when that 15 days to stop the spread was being proposed by Birx and her team to the Trump administration, they knew already that that was really just step one.
Libby Evans had it exactly right. What Dr. Birx was doing was making a case for the United States government to collect more data on their citizens in the case of an emergency. Dr. Birx wasn't trying to do a confession. She doesn't care about making a confession. I didn't read the book, just this. I've been reading and seeing people talk about this section. To me, it doesn't come across as any type of confession. It comes across as demanding more power. Jack Posobiec says Dr. Birx needs to be under investigation. And I like Jack a lot. There's no beef. This is not to have beef with Jack or anything like that. He's that dude, but that's asinine. There's nothing that's more useless than a congressional investigation. For what? Jack isn't talking about a criminal investigation. That surely wouldn't go anywhere. That's not happening. So an investigation by the House or Congress, whoever, special committee, special investigator, after they spend millions of dollars, all they do is come out with a piece of paper and say, this is what happened. We already know what happened, Jack. We don't have all the minute details, but that's not going to change our lives. That's not going to do anything. There should be nothing more important than making sure this never happens again. That should be the top priority. If you think an investigation can do that, I'm all for it, but I don't think so. They don't do that. That's not what they do. All of these people from the CDC, Fauci, all of them, they don't have power. They never had power. This is an indictment. The elephant in the room during that whole Posobiec segment is this is on Trump. They worked for and reported to Donald Trump. He was not helpless. He was not powerless. They were all working behind his back, but it's all on him. They can't do executive orders. They can't make legislation. If you do an investigation, all they have to do is say, we were providing guidance. No one had to listen. And they've already said that. Rochelle Walensky was pressed about school mask guidance when she was talking to a bunch of state leaders, governors. She said the CDC provides guidance. And she was still talking about you still got to muzzle kids in schools. It is our guidance that you have to muzzle kids in schools. What that means is it doesn't matter what the data says. Data, if it's done accurately and reported accurately, are facts. But the interpretation of the data is all opinion. So recommendation and guidance are just fancy words for opinions. There's nothing to investigate here, Jack. There's nothing to investigate other than Trump's incompetence, and he has not acknowledged any of these mistakes. They can look at the statistics for a virus with over a 99% survival rate and say martial law is what's needed. The CDC could do that. They don't have the power to enact it. No governor has to listen to them. No president has to listen to them. Nobody has to listen to them. The interpretation that they have is opinion. There's nothing to get them on. All they would have to say is, we didn't have data in America. We just went off Italy data, and here's our opinion on the data. It doesn't matter how asinine that opinion is. It doesn't matter what they did behind Trump's back. That means Trump didn't run a tight enough ship. Nobody did anything behind Obama's back. I'm not against Trump, but that's really ultimately on him. Executive powers are the problem. So Trump had executive powers. So now these other agencies can steamroll him because he was made to look like a fool in the media. Dr. Birx was one of the people when Trump was stumbling and bumbling over his words, talking about bleach and all other kinds of stuff. She knew what he really meant, but she didn't run to help him at all. She cringed. She tried to stab him in the back. Dr. Birx is one of the underrated villains of this whole thing. She's like a Poison Ivy. I think Poison Ivy is one of my favorite superhero villains, and she's underrated. There is no reason in any circumstances for an executive emergency. None. There's no reason for it anymore at all. We don't need it. Congress can write up new rules. I don't know if it would take legislation or whatever. Virtually, via phone, they could vote on anything. If zombies took over the country, we wouldn't have to fight for our own selves. We would know what to do. We would know to stay inside. We don't need the government to say, oh, emergency order, stay inside. The aliens are here. We would know what to do. The populist right won't have the power to pass legislation on this, but their time in DC is best spent making the case to get public momentum to do so, to limit executive power in 24, 28, 32. That's what the Freedom Convoy was for. Investigations don't accomplish that. Getting momentum to do these things in 24, 28, and 32. If you think investigations can do that, I'm all for it. I'm not buying it. This is why DeSantis' handling of the pandemic alone puts him above Trump. It starts out with the pandemic. And great place to start. That's where Ron DeSantis truly shined.
One Sunday afternoon in September 2020, Jay Bhattacharya, an epidemiologist at Stanford University, was at home in Los Altos when he got an unexpected call. It was Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and he wanted to talk about the coronavirus. In the early months of the pandemic, Bhattacharya had established himself as an outlier among public health experts. He is one of 3 scientists who drafted the Great Barrington Declaration.
So Ron DeSantis reached out to him. Ron DeSantis proactively reached out to, if you follow Jay on Twitter, he's still on Twitter. I don't know how he's able to stick around. He's one of the people who's been against the cabal narrative on the pandemic. So he was like a person that you know, if you were a public official, you would never reach out to. So that's why it's like he was very surprised by this. But Ron DeSantis did reach out.
Which argued that many governments were doing more harm than good by shutting down economies and schools. The only practical approach, they said, would be to protect the most vulnerable, mainly by isolating the elderly, and allow everyone else to go about their lives until vaccines and herd immunity neutralized the disease. With COVID-19 killing hundreds of Americans every day, the signers of the declaration became pariahs in their profession. I've lost friends, Bhattacharya told me. I'm lucky to have tenure. DeSantis, young and aggressively confident, was similarly convinced that he could find a better way to handle the virus. Talking with him, Bhattacharya was surprised by his command of the research. He'd read all the medical literature, all of it, not just the abstracts, he told me. The science, though, remained unclear. Did the virus linger on surfaces? Did it travel in droplets or in a fog? And many politicians found that the most appealing solutions were the ones that fit their ideology. For DeSantis, who espouses a libertarian vision of small government and personal freedom, the ideas in the Great Barrington Declaration resonated. In his view, the government, apart from protecting the elderly and making treatments available, should do almost nothing.
Talk about bars. So we look at what happened in 2020 and what was Trump's biggest failure. It was as soon as 2020 hit, he couldn't handle it. And I have never really blamed him for that because everyone was against him. But at the exact same time, you had Ron DeSantis, who did his own research, searched out his own people, talked to his own sources, and he originally did lockdowns for, I think it was 3 weeks, they'll say in the article here in a second, for 3 weeks, and then he said, no, that's not the way. No one else, I don't think anybody else in the country did that. I don't think any other executive in the country did that. That's his campaign ad right there. He doesn't need to do what that Eric Greitens did, busting through a door with the Navy SEAL team. That's a real ad where he really fought for your freedom on a political level.
Join the MAGA crew. Get a rhino hunting permit.
I'm pro 2A. I don't need to see a gun in your political ad. That goes for you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or anybody else. I know it's good for commercialization and all that.
Go to the website below and sign up to win my .50 caliber gun before Joe Biden bans it.
But I don't need that. What I need is proof that you would or will, or even better, have fought for freedoms. That is a guy who has on his resume, when everybody in the world was against where he was, he fought for freedom for Florida. That's why Lisa earlier in this chat was like, no, you can't have him. Yeah, we're going to need him. That's for damn sure.
Initially, as the virus began spreading in Florida, DeSantis had ordered a statewide lockdown in accordance with Dr. Anthony Fauci's recommendations. 3 weeks later, he changed his mind. "We will never do any of these lockdowns again," he said. After talking to Bhattacharya, he lifted nearly all remaining restrictions on schools, government buildings, stores, restaurants, and other private businesses, and halted the enforcement of mask mandates. As the death toll mounted, he was mocked by critics as DeathSantis and denounced by the mainstream press. "Any public distrust of this administration has been well earned," the Miami Herald editorial board wrote. "We can't trust the governor with our lives." A former political advisor with knowledge of the COVID response told me that DeSantis was unfazed. "We were getting crucified, but to him it was just noise." DeSantis revels in defying what he sees as a corrupt and self-satisfied liberal establishment. Those who work closely with him say that he is unique among elected officials in his disregard for public opinion and the press. "Ron's strength as a politician is that he doesn't give a fuck," a Republican consultant who knows him told me. "Ron's weakness as a politician is that he doesn't give a fuck. Big donors, he doesn't give a shit. Cancels on them all the time."
Woo! This is in the New Yorker. This is from the New Yorker, in the New Yorker. So I don't know if this is a concern. I don't know the New Yorker well. I always thought they were an establishment rag. Maybe this is a conservative writer. I don't know. But as the death toll mounted, he was mocked. We all remember this. It just happened, and he was labeled as DeathSantis. All this pressure from his donors and everybody. Like, you're not going along. You're taking a risk. Imagine if you just at your job, the relationship isn't boss with the federal government and the state, obviously, but it's kind of similar where it's like your boss says, no, we're all doing this. We're all locking down. And everybody in the world damn near is locking down. Trudeau and all the people who want to be president are all locking down everywhere. Abbott locked down in Texas. Everybody locked down. Italy locked down. The whole world locked down. And DeSantis was like, nah, that don't make no sense to me. That's who we want to run. That's why I'm excited. Because on this topic, he and comic Dave Smith would agree. Who else would agree? Jimmy Dore would agree. And they're all, you got left, you got libertarian, and you got, I would call him authoritarian, but I was going to call him an authoritarian libertarian. They're going to kill me for, people who value liberty would kill me for that. I think Ron DeSantis is an authoritarian liberal. He wants to force his libertarianism on you, but I'm good with that. And Nick Fuentes, if you call him far right or whatever you call him, white nationalist, not in a racist or bad way, but he would agree too. On the fundamental issue, we have to agree on that. Tulsi Gabbard would agree on that. I don't know where Yang stands on that. I have to look that up. How could you not be excited by that? DeSantis revels in defying what he sees as a corrupt and self-satisfied liberal establishment. Those who work closely with him say that he's unique among elected officials in his disregard for public opinion and the press. Ron's strength as a politician is that he doesn't give a fuck. And Republican consultants who know him told me his biggest weakness is that he doesn't give a fuck. That's what we want. Big donors, he doesn't give a shit. Cancels on them all the time. So when you looked at Disney, I was like, where did this come from? It makes perfect sense now. If you look at it, he has the cojones. Remember what happened with Disney. They wanted to get into the culture wars. And Ron DeSantis says, I'm not your average politician. I'm not Donald Trump. You fuck around, you will find out. And they did, real quickly. Man, this guy, there's a lot to like. That's all I'm gonna have to say. I've gone back, chatted back and forth with one of my favorite writers, editors, Cassandra McDonald, on this, and I think she's kind of shaky on him too, but I was shaky on him too, and I was like, I think we just got to go along for the ride at this point.